Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Linda Baker, and I'm here with Robert Nomera and Diane Lalonde, and we're from the Center for Research and Education on Violence Against Women and Children. And we're delighted to bring you this webinar, How Law and Stigma Harm People Who Do Sex Work. And we've had 1,000 people register for this webinar. So we're really excited for the conversation that we're going to be able to have with our panelists. Wherever you are on Turtle Island today, please join us in acknowledging and thanking the generations of Indigenous peoples who have cared for these lands and in celebrating the continued strength and spirit of Indigenous peoples. As settlers, we commit to making the promise of truth and reconciliation real in our communities, and in particular, to bring justice for murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls across the country. Today's webinar comes from the Learning Network and the Knowledge Hub. And before I introduce our speakers, I would just like to go through our format. And our format for today is a little different than our typical webinars if you're a regular participant in our webinars. We're going to have a panel discussion format. And we've developed questions that will help guide, but there'll also be a sort of a free-flowing discussion on our topic for today. And throughout the discussion, we invite you to type any comments or questions that you may have for our panelists into the Q&A box. And Diane and Robert are going to track those, and at the conclusion of the more structured part of our discussion, there will be an opportunity for those questions to be presented to our panelists for their response. And we're hoping to have about 20 minutes to do that. So also at the end of the webinar, in the chat box, you will see a link to the evaluation form. And again, we count on your responses, especially as this is a new format for us. And we're really interested in your thoughts on whether this is something you'd like us to do more of. Once you complete the evaluation form, you'll be directed to a web page where you will be prompted to enter your full name and email address. And then a certificate of attendance will be generated and emailed to you. And just so you know that that's quite separate from your evaluation. So the name is never linked to your responses on the evaluation form. We'll also be recording this webinar, and it will be posted on our website in a few days. And once posted, Sarah Mohammed will send out an email to everybody who registered so that they can access the recording. And now to introduce our panelists. Julie Bowman is a co-founder, coordinator, and board chair of SafeSpace London. Julie, can you wave? Great. SafeSpace, Julie will tell us a little more about it, but it's a drop-in center and community for, by, and with sex workers and accomplices. She has been a community activist for over 20 years. In 2001, she co-founded Unity Project for relief of homelessness in London, Ontario, with fellow youth activists and homeless individuals, creating a tent city in a downtown park that led to the initiation of the Unity Project, a shelter service with a peer-supported community model. Since 2015, Julie has been a peer researcher in community-based projects, most recently an exploration of sex workers' use of digital technology. She has been instrumental in activities related to raising awareness about the harmful impacts of policing, criminalization, and stigma in the lives of sex workers. Elaine Lamb, can you wave, Elaine? is a community organizer and human rights defender. She holds a Master of Social Work and a Master of Law with a specialization in human rights. She is currently a PhD candidate at McMaster University, where she is researching the harms associated with anti-trafficking initiatives. Elaine has been actively engaged in work related to human rights, violence against women, migration, gender, and sex work justice for more than 20 years. Elaine is the executive director and a founder of Butterfly, Asian and migrant sex workers support network in Canada. Jennifer Porter, and that's our remaining panelist, is a longtime supporter of human rights and an activist in the sex work community. She holds a Bachelor of Arts in Human Rights and Equity Studies and is currently working on her master's degree in Socio-Legal Studies at York University, where the focus of her research is on how the criminalization of sex work causes harm to sex workers. Jennifer is currently the program manager at Maggie's, Toronto Sex Workers Action Project, where she has worked for the past 6 years. I think just with that little bit of information about our speakers, you can anticipate that we have a very knowledgeable group and looking forward to the discussion. We want to start the panel discussion by asking each presenter very briefly to describe their organization and its mandate and work. And perhaps if that's okay, we could start with you, Elaine.
Okay, so I'm with Butterfly, which is an Asian and migrant sex workers support network. So we are the grassroots organization. So we have outreach, we have 24 hours hotline. So we give a lot of support to the community and also build the leadership of the community. So a lot of our work is about capacity building, so that how the sex worker can get organized and fight for the rights and also get the social justice and also access different kind of service. And a big part of our work also educate the public, because there is so many myths about sex work and migration, and also we do a lot of advocacy because we found many law and policy they claim protecting sex worker but make sex worker more unsafe and also violate their rights. So yeah.
Okay, thank you. And I hope that we can learn more about some of those things as we go through our questions today and our discussion. Julie, can we turn to you next?
Yeah, so SafeSpace is located in London, Ontario. We're a physical drop-in space celebrating our 10-year anniversary. We decided to create our space at a time when things were really tense in our neighborhood, and the Constitution was being challenged, so there was a lot of gray areas and no one knew what was or wasn't legal. So there were a lot of people who did sex work being targeted in our neighborhood. So we decided to create somewhere where people could come as they are and just be, with the goal of empowerment and helping folks live with more safety and dignity. And Maggie's was such an inspiration for our space. Beyond our physical space, our drop-in center, we also do different advocacy work like court accompaniment, health work advocacy, childcare, working with people dealing with CIS. And then we also have a bad date messaging and check-in line, so people can text if they've text or leave a voicemail with the details of a bad client that they wish to warn others about, or just check in and out of dates. Yeah.
Thank you, Julie. That's over to you, Jennifer.
Yeah, so Maggie's is, we're a nonprofit. We're also a registered charity. We're run by and for sex workers in Toronto, also, surrounding areas too. So we were formed in 1986, so we've been around for a long time, officially incorporated in 1991. So our mission is to empower sex workers to live and work with safety and dignity. So we also fight for the full decriminalization of sex work, which we believe will significantly reduce the harms that sex workers experience due to the criminalization. So we have a lot of different programs. We have a drop-in once a week for folks, and also a support group that we do once a month. And we have another peer outreach program for sex workers to do outreach in the community. Peer-led programs are so important. So we just provide general supports. We do informal counseling, different things like that, provide harm reduction supplies, safer drug use, safer sex use supplies for folks if they want to come in. So yeah, we do a lot of work in the community as well. We do advocacy work, and yeah.
Thank you, Jennifer.
No problem.
One of the things that anybody who's working in gender-based violence sector, violence work, period, knows that language matters.
Mm-hmm.
And we often hear prostitution used interchangeably with sex work. And we're just wondering if you could comment on what language you believe is most empowering and some of the reasons for that. And maybe, Jennifer, we'll start with you this time, if that's all right.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, prostitution, I mean, we believe it's a derogatory term that's used quite often. And I think that sex work was a term that was created to sort of bring attention to the labor aspect of sex work, that it is a job, it's real work. I mean, we used to use prostitution before the term sex work. I mean, Maggie's, I think we were called prostitutes of Toronto, like our actual organization's name. But I think that a lot of times we hear prostitution used in a derogatory manner. So sex work really kind of is a way to accentuate the labor involved. I don't know if anyone else wants to comment on that as well. Yeah.
What I've sort of, in my learnings, it's like prostitute and prostitution is almost like a legalese term used to talk about sex workers or people who engage in sex work by other people who maybe don't have a clue about what's going on, and was used very totally a derogatory term. It's one of those words where like it's okay for people who engage sex work to use it, but it's something that no one else should call someone who engages in sex work. Yeah, it's definitely like a derogatory legalese term. That's how I would know it as. I don't know about you, Elaine.
And I think that people may identify or may not identify as sex worker, but I think sex worker, this term has a lot of important political meaning, and also the meaning of respect the labor rights and respect the work of the sex worker. I think this is very important, and we keep like thinking why some organizations or some people so reluctant to use the term sex worker is because their politics, they may really don't think sex work is work, and we think this is very problematic because you really don't, the people reject to use the term sex worker is not respecting the labor and the rights, the particular labor rights of the sex worker. So that's, as the sex worker organization, we use this term, but like Julie said, every day working with the community so that we may use different terms because sometimes the sex worker community is facing a lot of stigma. So that is that's why in the community level we also use it fluidly. But for public education or for the public, I think it's very important to use the term sex worker as the way to respect the community. Yes.
I agree. Yeah.
So a couple of things out of that I'm hearing. One of the main ones is the stigma that's associated with the term prostitution, but also you've all commented on the importance of recognizing it as work and the labor aspect. Another thing that we wanted to get you to weigh in on is that for some, the term sex work and human trafficking are used as one and the same or interchangeably. Can you speak to that? And I don't know who would like to start that one.
Yeah, I just want to emphasize this is not the term interchangeable, but I think the purposeful, some people conflating sex work and trafficking have a political or with the aim of stopping sex work. So I think it's very clear it's not people like using this term interchangeable. It's just some anti-sex worker group. They want to hide the anti-sex worker agenda, and then they use the term anti-trafficking that make the people don't see the real agenda actually is against sex work. So I think I want to be clear. It's not all the people conflating, but it's some people particular promoting this conflating idea. So to make now have many people conflating this idea. So yeah.
Okay, that's very helpful. Julie, did you want to weigh in as well or add anything to that?
I agree with what Elaine's saying. I think it is like there is a movement that is consciously trying to conflate the two, even though human trafficking or coercion, it's non-consensual. And also I think there is a bit of like infantilizing people who engage in sex work in that like suggesting that people don't have the agency to make these types of decisions, and especially those who are exchanging sexual services for resources. A lot of that time it's like I feel like, yeah, people don't there are some groups and movements that don't necessarily want people who are making those types of choices to have agency and gain power and be able to grow in whatever situation they're in, if that makes sense.
No, I agree too. I think there's a lot of organizations, you know, anti-sex work and anti-trafficking organizations that they don't recognize the labor involved and they don't consider sex work as work. And you know, I'm sure Elaine and Julie will agree that sex workers do not need to be saved. Like Julie was mentioning, the infantilization of sex workers. We hear that a lot, that, you know, we need saving, but sex work is consensual. We're choosing to do that work, even though that might mean that some folks might not have other options other than to do sex work, but a lot of sex workers choose to do that work. So I think the conflation of sex work and trafficking is, like Elaine said, very political and purposeful.
Yeah. And I want to ask, because why some people think sex work is trafficking, because by the definition, they think that the people is being forced or coerced, like in the to force the work to exploit them. And because the assumption is no woman will consent to or like will agree to do sex work, so that the assumption every sex worker engaged in sex work is violence against the woman. So in this assumption, actually we found it's very problematic, because is as Julie said, that is take away the agency of the people, because you don't really care about how people think, but you just put the assumption no one can consent, or no one will agree, or no one will take decision to work in sex industry. But I think, like Jenny and also Julie said, people in many industries, not only in sex work, people work in McDonald's. You may ask them, do you want to dream of you will sell 100 burger every day? Of course, people say no, right? But you don't think that they are exploited, you don't want to save them. But why, when sex workers that sometimes they have the bad days, they don't want to work, or they work it for money, that you think is exploitation? So I think this is very problematic assumption. And we see how traffic victim label is so effective to put on youth and also Asian sex worker and indigenous, because they are the people being perceived, they don't have agency. So we work with migrant sex worker, and so many service provider or people say, oh, what happened if the women are too victimized? They don't know they are the victim. And this is a strong assumption that the people cannot make decision, and also that they need to be rescued. But so that's why it's very important. We need to challenge it and recognize people may have different circumstances and different reasons to engage in sex work, but also in other industry, right? That why you treat sex work so different is because everyone work it for money, but why some sex worker tell you, I do it for money, and then you say, oh, that she is economic coercion, so that we need to rescue them. So I think this is very important. We need to reflect on, and then we really hope all the people stop conflating sex work and trafficking, because it's really, really harmful.
I'd like to add one more thing too. Another thing that we've noticed in our community is that the benefit of conflating sex work with human trafficking is that sex workers can be used as human trafficking stats. And the more stats, the more possible funds an organization can qualify for. So I think that is another part of the political, the complexity of the reason why this is so political. That if you can count more people as trafficked, then yeah, it could equal more dollars.
Absolutely, yeah.
Jennifer, did you want to add anything?
Well, I think like we've seen that firsthand when the laws changed in 2014, and the government offered, I think it was $20 million for organizations in anti-trafficking efforts for funding for organizations. And I know Maggie's had applied for this funding and we were denied. But there are many organizations that got it that, you know, have created like exit programs that are very harmful. And it's a lot of money that we could have used to support sex workers and support sex workers who do want to exit the industry. But yeah, there is a lot of money in the anti-trafficking industry in general, so it is really problematic because of that.
Yeah, and we've learned too that it's one of the only you know, huge streams of federal money that doesn't have any formal research linked to it before the money was released. So that's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not hearing you say that there isn't instances and that you're not concerned when human trafficking does exist, whether that be in terms of different types of labor or human trafficking that is for sexual exploitation. But I'm hearing you say it's the conflation and some of the concern about the motives for that conflation that you're really identifying.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that people, so like trafficking is one of the issues faced by the sex worker community, like any kind of labor. But how we handle other labor exploitation, right? We enforce the labor rights, and we really make the people more able to access labor protection. So instead of shutting down, right? So we see so many farms and restaurants, they are exploiting the worker, but you don't say, oh, we need to criminalize restaurant. We need to like criminalize and shut down all the farm, right? So that we don't have the same solution. That why sex work, we think shut down the massage parlor or shut down the workers' place or bring in police will be the solution. So, and I think that is very clear. It's not care about trafficking, but the people have that agenda. They just want to abolish sex work.
Right. You've mentioned a lot about safety, dignity, and I'm just wondering, has there been progress in that area? Well, you've talked about the term sex work helps to recognize the labor involved. Has there been progress in terms of safety and dignity? I know the work your organizations do helps with that, but in a more broad sense, what would be your thoughts about that? Where are we today?
So I don't know, maybe Julie or like SafeSpace, right? Like no, you go ahead.
You go ahead, Elaine.
Okay, so
I think
you
you're
see our
invited to go first, Elaine.
Okay, thank you. So because I think this is our goal, this is our objective, like other people should be safe, should have the dignity, and they should access the right. But now because sex work is being criminalized, because engaged in sex work and particular third party and being a sex worker still have a lot of chance being charged and a lot of discrimination. It create a barrier that people cannot assess the safety. And I keep asking many women organizations, they claim that they care about the women's safety, but we keep having the information from the community that who are the major source of the violence. Actually, law enforcement is the major source of violence against sex workers across different type of sex worker, no matter age, no matter race. So, but why no one care about that? And in proportion to the trafficking issue that is like much more scale, the level of what violence is much more higher and the systematic. So for example, the bylaw enforcement officer in Toronto, they are allowed to ask the woman to take off the clothes to check their underwear. And Canadian HIV/AIDS Legal Network just finished the report. In Ontario, so many different sex workers in different cities say that they are so badly treated by the police, abused by the police, and this is not being cared. So that's why we really want the people to understand what the sex workers are really facing and why sex workers cannot go to the find different support when they have want to protect the safety, because people work together, the people may get charged. So that even some of the safety measures they want to do to protect the community themselves is not allowed. And I also like exiting program. It is also the example that is force the people. It's no different with the coercion conversion program with the gay people. This is the violence against the sex worker, because you take away the livelihood of people, force people to do something else itself is the violence. So we use a broader sense of safe, so safe from discrimination and safe from violence and safe from different kind of oppression. So I think this is the goal of Butterfly, and I think that is also, I believe it's a lot of like common goal for many sex workers. Yeah.
Thank you, Elaine. Julie or Jennifer, do you want to add to that? I think because what we're sort of getting at, and you've made reference to it, but we haven't fleshed it out. Elaine has started that just now, but how you've all stated that criminalization can harm sex workers. Can you help us understand, in addition to what Elaine has just shared, how does it harm them, in addition to what Elaine has talked about?
Well, I mean, I can tell you firsthand, you know, service users that come to us, like Elaine said, you know, even if they're, you know, they have a bad date, they were abused by a client, or they won't go to the police in most cases because they face discrimination and stigma from the police as well, or they've had bad experiences in the past with police, so they don't feel comfortable. They come to us to report it. We also have a bad date list here, but it's like very problematic when it's the criminalization that's harmful, because sex workers don't feel safe reporting abuse or you know, any bad date situation they might be in. Like, I think that's a big issue, is we can't really assess the safety when sex work is criminalized and it's being pushed underground into unsafe spaces, you know. So I don't know if Julie wants to add to that.
Yeah, so there's so much confusion on as the laws stand now, because it almost has posed it like, oh, well, sex work is legal. But in fact, I'm going to go back to the fast food analogy. So what's happening right now is it would be equivalent to, like, if you're allowed to make burgers, you can make the burger, but no one can sell you the bun. No one can put your billboard up for advertising. Anyone who actually purchases your burger is criminalized. And yeah, by no one can sell you, I mean, like, if anyone is selling you that bun, they can be criminalized. If anyone is advertising your burgers, they can be criminalized. Mm-hmm. So it is still totally illegal. So what all that does is it pushes things further underground, because of course you don't want that person who is your client, who's your income, who's your livelihood, to be criminalized. And so when you do experience someone who is harmful, people are not able to report that to law enforcers, because then it essentially puts a target on them as a service provider and all of their clients who are their livelihood. So the way things are set up, yes, I would say we do, you know, there have been some steps within our community of to promote safety and dignity, in that we have a community that supports each other more and more, just within that community. But what we do, the experiences that are constantly shared with people who do report are negative, or just, you know, for example, in our community, we had Josie Glenn, who was murdered, and the person who murdered her just a few weeks before confined and strangled someone, who went to police, who said, I know for sure this man is going to kill someone. Had we even had that warning, like had they even let us know, things could have been different. But it was a horrendous experience for her, and as we know, nothing happened, and it's too late. So yes, there are little steps within our own communities, but it's, with the laws as they are, it's still such an upward, there's still a lot of work to be done. Yeah.
Yeah, and for us, like the criminalization is not only criminal law. Now criminal law criminalize client, criminalize third party, and that means, like Julie said, almost all the activity is being criminalized. And but also, like, they are criminalized sex work by different other law, like immigration law. Any migrant or like people with temporary work permit, they can work in Canada. They have open work permit, but they are not allowed to work in sex industry. So this is the tools that the CBSA or the people can use to against the sex worker. Even they claim that they protect the sex worker by having this law. And the other is also the municipal level. So many people now advocate the city should do more things concerned about trafficking. But what we see, I just went to the court yesterday. So in Hamilton, they have like more than 9 massage parlor being raised, 2 already shut down. They're trying to shut down like 9 more massage parlor. So after you shut down the place, people, where they can go. In Toronto, that there are 400 massage parlor, 200 worker. Last few years, the city of Toronto also trying to shut down the massage parlor, that make the people not able to work. In the process, also there is a lot of like police abuse, excessive investigation, when there is no resources for housing, no resources for the people experience violence. So 9 full-time worker now is only checking 400 massage parlor every day. So that you see the level of surveillance. For example, the Operation Spotlight is the yearly anti-trafficking investigation. They go to the sex worker place to ask a lot of their personal questions, and it is huge surveillance. And we have so many people being arrested, detained, and deported during that anti-trafficking investigation. We have the report, I think we have put it on the link, so that we really hope that the people know about sex worker is affected not only criminal law, but also immigration law, municipal law, and also different kind of policy make the people at risk and also punished by different legal system. Yeah.
I just want to take that opportunity to mention that our panelists provided a list of links to websites, resources, and that Sarah is going to make sure that that's accessible to everybody that registered for this webinar. So again, our appreciation to all of you for putting that together, because I think that people will continue to want to learn more and understand more following this webinar.
Mm-hmm. And I want to add, because the surveillance not only by law enforcement, I see some participants also mentioned there is a lot of training for hotel staff, Uber driver, and also social service provider. the surveillance is happen everywhere, instead of empowering the worker, you just make them more vulnerable because they are always being kicked out by many places, or they are not able to use the transportation, banking, and the marginalization actually put the sex worker more at risk. So that's I think that is the impact of the criminalization. And thank you for some participant mention about that.
And even banks too. Another example of the sort of surveillance that is happening. I haven't gone through the whole thing, but FinTrack just did release whatever the recommendations are, and it's like making frequent cash deposits, late deposits, just all these things that can flag someone as someone who's potentially trafficked, which literally, like, when I was serving, this would, when I used to serve in a restaurant, that would like exactly lay out who, like, my bank track, you know. So yeah, it's just,
so some of the things that are being identified as red flags or warning signs in terms of human trafficking could also represent something completely different than that. And you're describing some of those. One of the things that you've all spoken out against criminalization, and you've explained some really compelling reasons for that. So is there another approach? What approach would you like to see Canada take? And does it exist somewhere else in the world? And is there a place for us to look to? Because it seems like different countries are responding in different ways. Jennifer, start us off.
Yeah, so we fight for decriminalization, as I think most sex worker organizations do, because that enables sex workers to work how they want to, where they want to, when they want to, you know. So I think we need to make a distinction too between that decrim and legalization. So legalization would mean the government would regulate all aspects of sex work, which would be harmful to a lot of sex workers who may not be able to work in certain areas or to afford a license to do sex work, or, you know, different factors like that. So I know that New Zealand has decriminalized sex work, I think quite a few years ago, 6 or 7 years ago now. And it's significantly reduced the harms. There's been a lot of studies done on that since then. And also New South Wales in Australia has also decriminalized sex work. So I think that to decriminalize means that we get to decide, like as sex workers, how we want to work, how we want to do our job. It also makes sex work more safe because it's more out in the open. You know, we don't have to work in unsafe spaces. So I don't know if anyone else has any comments on that as well.
Yeah, and I think we ask for full decriminalization of sex work because I think some people say, oh, Canada, we already decriminalization of sex worker, but actually client is still criminalized and third parties being criminalized. And I think we call it the Nordic model or whatever, like model. And I think this is also very problematic because in our experience for migrant sex worker, clients are very important resources when the sex worker in dangerous or in the vulnerable situation. Sometimes it's the client contact us so that we are able to offer the support and client pay for the money, legal fee, or help them to rent the room. But when client criminalized, this is not able to happen anymore. As Jenny say, like the New Zealand is the place have decriminalization, but we also hope that there will be the change that because they are still don't allow migrant workers to work in sex industry. So if we want all the sex workers to be safe, so that sex work should be treated as other worker, other industry, that they should have the like equal fair treatment, so that there is the program, then the people able to work legally even for the migrant, and they have the equal right and support, not only criminalized, but should not have excessive repressive local policy to make the business not able to run. Yeah,
I agree.
Yeah, so all of our organizations are part of the Canadian Alliance for Sex Work law reform and a lot of different organizations across Canada wide. And I don't know, a couple years ago, they came out with safety, dignity, equity recommendations for sex work law reform in Canada, and it's linked in that all of the resources that will be shared. But so there's 49 steps or something like that, but then there also is a condensed version with that has, like, you know, the first 3 steps. And I think it's an easy read. It's only a few pages, and if people want to take the time to sort of look through those first 3 things, you know, and it's decriminalizing sex work completely, using existing laws instead of the new laws for the Nordic model. I think I have written down some of the laws that already exist. So, like, we already have assault, bodily harm, sexual assault, theft, robbery, kidnapping, environment, extortion, intimidation, criminal harassment, uttering threats, death or physical harm, blah, 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 blah. There already are those laws that that exist. So, yeah, as the Nordic model, if we call it that, it's really just an end-demand model. And I've sat and heard you know, the Crown in courts myself say, you know, if there's lives lost, that is what it is. We need to make this as uncomfortable as possible so that people no longer choose to engage in sex work. Like,
Yeah.
it's a total myth that the Nordic model was created to promote safety, to promote safety among women or sex workers or people who are trafficked even.
No, I agree. The Nordic model is basically to end the demand for sex work, which we all know that's not going to happen. When we try to criminalize anything like drugs or alcohol, you know, we have done that in the past. That doesn't mean people aren't still going to use those things, right? It's just going to make it, you know, go more underground and be less safe. So yeah, it's not about making. So the Nordic model is basically to, you know, criminalize the client, which makes it very unsafe for sex workers.
Yeah, and I think that in TIA has more than 250 participants, and I think it's very great that you're interested in this issue, and I think it is very important no matter what position you have now, but you need to know why so many sex workers and sex worker community tell you that the law is so harmful, and punishing the client, punishing the third party and criminalize sex work is not helpful, it's not useful. And I think this is very important that to have your support to work with the sex worker community to change the law. Otherwise, the sex work cannot have safety, cannot have dignity, cannot be respected, and cannot have the equal rights as other people. And I think, thank you for this question, because I think, but it is not only the discussion what model is good, but how, like, the people care about the issue can really listen to the sex worker community to work together to bring the change and challenge what the illusion the government giving us, like sex worker is not illegal now. So I think this is very important, and I hope like all the participants will really listen to the sex worker community. Even you don't have very clear idea about that because something is maybe different with what you have been heard. So, and then feel free to access the Canadian Canadian Sex Work Law Reform Network and also approaching us. I think this is very important for you to really understand how the law actually harm the sex worker.
So, and also I think like the Bill C-36, which was the legislation that was brought forward, is called the Protection of Communities and Exploited Persons Act, but it does not protect sex workers. So I mean, we really have to look at the laws, and the resources that we provided really explain the laws in plain language. So it's really important for folks to look at that and really understand how they affect sex workers.
We're going to, I can just tell because my colleagues are typing away here like crazy, which tells me that there's a number of comments and questions for you. So if it's okay, I'm going to turn now and I'm going to start with Diane and ask you to share one of the questions from a participant.
Sure. So there's actually been a couple of questions where people said, have you read this article or that article that was in the media? And what I see coming through is a general question around how is sex work presented in the media? Does it accurately present the work or reflect the work, or does it present some harm?
Sorry, I cannot hear the question. Can you say again? Sorry.
Oh, yes.
Sure. So how is sex work presented in the media? Do these presentations accurately reflect the work in your experience or the experiences of individuals who access your organizations? Or do these presentations present some harm?
I mean, I know I've seen some articles written by journalists that one I saw actually outed a sex worker without their consent, which is very problematic and can be very dangerous for someone to be outed in their, their community and to, like, everyone who's reading those articles. So sometimes I find it's not reflected in a positive light as well. Many articles I've come across, and news and any kind of media. I don't know. I just haven't had any positive, seen anything really that positive in the media in general, in mass media anyway. I don't know about anyone else. But
I think it is often see like in the newspaper you see, oh, the police raid the massage parlor, and in Hamilton there is an orchard like mission, something like that. It's like, oh, the police go to rescue the woman, but what is it in reality? Because we are working with the woman, that the people is being threatened, being surveillance, arrested, detained, and deported. So that's why the people think law enforcement reporting is good thing, because the media is keep telling this story, but what is behind the story? So that's why we published a report called Behind the Rescue, so that actually behind the newspaper, what happened is the people being sexually assaulted or violated rights by the law enforcement, and money being stolen by the police and being locked up and being deported, and this kind of story we are not able to bring it to the media. So that's why, other than reading the newspaper, we hope like all of you may also read the report and also resources from the sex worker community to know more about the reality of the sex worker. And Julie also have a wonderful report, right?
I'm just, one of the things that is a theme that's coming out in your comments, we know that broadly in almost every area, there's been such an emphasis on the voices of those with lived experience, and how we should not move ahead. We should be incorporating and working with and really learning from those with lived experience. Why do you think, how do you explain that it's seemingly such a challenge to have the voices with lived experience heard, and so that they're informing decisions that are made that affect them so strongly?
I don't know. I think that a lot of people in society just, they have a moral issue with sex work, and also have these preconceived notions about sex work, and maybe, from the media and what they've seen in movies and TV. A lot of people have this negative view of sex work, and and also, they don't like the infantilization of sex workers, that they don't have agency, and so why would we want to hear their voices? I don't know. We come across that all the time, that our voices are, we want to, our voice to be heard, but we get shut down a lot because we don't know what we're talking about, So I don't know if anyone else wants to comment on that. Yeah.
One of the example is 300 people in massage parlor went to City Hall and tell the staff and tell the city councillor, we are not traffic victim. We need our work. We need to continue to work. But there is one white anti-trafficking group, actually is anti-sex worker organization. They say, no, there is a lot of trafficking in massage parlor, shut them down. And then so that you see the policymakers don't listen to the community. They listen to the people with power, with sources, and they got so much money, they can do media campaign. So that is really, really big challenge. It's difficult for the workers to come out to speak because so much stigma, but even workers come out to speak, they don't listen. And some of the service provider will wonder what happened to this woman, that is it they are too vulnerable, they don't know, actually they have other choice, right? But they still choosing something they want to listen, not truly listen to what the workers want. I think this is a really huge challenge related to racism, related to so deeply the people don't agree sex work is the work, that they really doubt when the people really want to use it as survival or use it to resist other kind of oppression. And I think this is very, very challenging. And we are also asking for more people. We really need to listen to the sex worker. So
Exactly.
I'm going to turn to Robert to share another question from a participant.
Yeah, sure. I think there's been a fair bit of positive response on this most recent question regarding giving voice to the lived experience of persons, and as well as supporting them. There were two kind of complementary comments here. One, do you have any tips on how we can support women at the local level in a community-based capacity, kind of building, I guess, on the supporting of individuals? And then someone else commented just a moment ago, listening to community, such a good point. How do we hold those with power responsible, or sorry, how do we hold those with power to make decisions to change accountable?
We've seen just in our community, so people don't understand the risk of what it means to ask someone who does sex work to come out and just tell everyone all about what's needed. Like, we all know, everybody knows what's best for themselves, for their community. We all know that. But as Jen and Elaine mentioned, it's like, you know, when people do show up, when they do go out, when they do like take all this risk, they get no response. If you want to, you know, be an ally, be an accomplice with your sex working community, connect with the closest organization to you, even if that's further away, and ask, like, what can I do? What can my organization do? Within London, Ontario, we've seen people who have like itty bitty bits of power really, you know, ally with us, become accomplices in this work, and take up to call in, you know, whatever's going on, to amplify, you know, all these resources we have, all this research, all this information, share it, push it, hold people accountable, because it can be really hard for people who are doing work that's essential to their living, that's also criminalized, to be the ones to have to be always taking that risk, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And so Butterfly has organized field training for the service provider, have better understanding how to support the sex worker, because the people think that if I support sex worker, right, it seems that we are not able to address the violence or trafficking of the sex worker, but it's opposite. When you know how to support sex worker rights, and working with the sex worker is the best way to advocate for the labor rights and support the sex worker in different violence or vulnerable situations, including trafficking. So we will have one new webinar training in January. We'll talk about like how to engage with the community and how to remove the barrier, because many sex workers don't use the service provider, and difficult to build the trust, so that how to make the service be accessible and can be the good ally, and how to better support the migrant sex worker in different places. But I think recognize the agency of the sex worker and respect sex work is a work, no matter your own decision, because your moral agenda is not more important than our lives, right? So that even you may not agree with the people sell sex, whatever, this is your own agenda. But when the people engage in this industry, you need to reflect on whether what you are doing actually is helpful, support for someone, or make the sex worker become more dangerous, vulnerable, and or or you take away the power of the worker. I think this is very important that we really hope the people care about this issue. We really think about that.
Also, can I just add that Maggie's also has a training that we do. It's a training workshop on best practices for working with sex workers. So if there's anyone listening that is, has an organization that may have clients that are sex workers, we offer this training to staff at community organizations throughout the city and outside of, like in the GTA, that really educate staff on sex work and the laws and all the issues that sex workers deal with due to stigma and criminalization. So, and to support, us, like to support organizations like Maggie's and Butterfly and Safe Spaces, that's very important.
Yeah, I use in previous times when I was, almost 20 years ago, squatting this park, and we were promoting harm reduction with safer injection supplies and safer inhalation supplies, and people thought we were just crazy. Now that is common practice. Everyone's all on board with harm reduction. We'll see decriminalization of sex work as a form of harm reduction as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's okay to not know or to feel uncomfortable or maybe to imagine it as something you wouldn't want to do, but like, yeah, be open and listen to those communities.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
I'm just
in our resource list, here is how to be the good ally resources that you may also read. It's produced by Stella, Montreal Sex Worker Organization. Yeah.
Thank you, Aline. I think that's so important, and whatever term you use, but aspiring allies, aspiring accomplices, I think it is important to hear how best, because the intent, I think, of many people is good, but there's confusion or lack of understanding of how to act, how to take steps to act on the good intention. So I really appreciate that you've included that in your list of resources. Diane, back to you with another question.
Yeah, this is a good follow-up question to the conversation you were just having. So someone noted that they're a worker in a shelter, and that often entrance into the shelter is heavily based on risk assessment tools. And they're wondering if there are any risk assessments available to support sex workers that they might be able to incorporate in order to better manage and assess risk.
I don't know if I could just quickly say that I know some shelters in Toronto have policies where if they know that one of their service users is a sex worker, that they allow them to stay out later in the evening, and because a lot of times there's a curfew. So they understand that some sex workers have to go out and work in the evening time, so they do allow that. So I think that's really important and also to ask what workers need, like what do they need in order to be able to do their work and do it safely. I think that's important.
And I think for us, the risk assessments, the name actually is not assessing the people risk, but the risk assessment itself is very risky for many sex workers. Because before the people go to the shelter, they may ask, what do you need, what do you want? But because now they need to identify the red flag, that to find the trafficking case, what happened is they will ask a lot of invasive questions that actually make the sex worker feel very unsafe. For example, immigration status, who are they work with, where did they work, and their experience, how to spend their money, that all kind of questions for the organization they think is assessing whether the people in risk, but from the sex worker eyes, this all question is the risk I engage with the system. And in order to avoid those systems, I may not use the shelter or other service anymore. So I think this is very important. And in our training, many recommendation is like, for example, don't need the people to identify themselves, no need to provide legal name, and how to make the service become accessible. The risk assessment should not become the barrier for the people. And the question of the risk should ask what the people need, what the people want, instead of having other agenda.
Exactly. Even here, we don't do intake or anything. Like, we don't ask for anyone's name or information. It's all anonymous, so people feel safe coming here, especially as a sex worker. Like Elaine said, we don't ask for any kind of information. So
Can you just before we go back to Robert for another question, can you just, I think sometimes people have a very narrow idea in their mind when they hear the word sex work. Can you just talk a little bit, maybe Jennifer, about what is meant in terms of that term generally, the types of work?
Oh, well, I mean, so we consider all types of work sex work. So anything from, you know, people who work outdoors on the street, people who work indoors as escorts, people that do massage, people that do dancing, like stripping, also BDSM, people who are like dominatrix or submissives, webcam models. But you have to keep in mind too, a lot of people might not self-identify as a sex worker in some of those jobs, but we consider them sex workers in order to support them in whatever they need, if they need our services or support. So there's many different types of sex work in the industry. But like I said, even like sugar babies and sugar daddies, a lot of folks that are sugar babies might not identify as a sex worker, but we would consider them a sex worker in order to offer them support. So, yeah.
Thank you. Robert?
A question that came up. Can you speak at all to discussions throughout the sex worker community about the best practices and approach to supporting youth who are experimenting with sex work and experience additional barriers to safety and support?
I don't know if anyone wants to comment on that.
I think we need to ask the question because now people think exiting or like rescuing the youth is the solution, right? But we need to ask why so many youth engage in sex work. They feel sex work actually more safe than shelter or their group home, right? So I think law enforcement is not the solution for adult and law enforcement, and we also know childcare system is so abusive for so many youth. And I think that we need to revisit what is the youth support program we have, and then what is the support that the youth can get. Instead of thinking ending them in sex industry is the only goal, right? Because people, I don't know if you see the Hong Kong movement, like so many youth, 12, 13, 14, 15 years old is going to protest, and then the politicians say they don't know nothing. But actually, is it they don't know anything, particularly now when talk about the youth, many people are like 16, 17, 18, there is a lot of issue going on. Instead of just focusing, exiting them, right, rescuing them, but what they really need, right? What is the really support? And I have engaged in a sex worker project supporting youth when their law enforcement is the problem. That why we always introduce the problem to address the issue, right? So that we need to think about why the people engage in the industry and why the people are being discriminated. And we also need to reflect on, so why the age of consent is 16, the people can have sex, but when they get money, immediately become exploitation without seeing the complexity of the issue. Because what we see when the people think sex work may be one of the resources, alternative to them, but you take away the alternative, some people may need to go back to the abusive relationship, or they may need to go back to abusive family. So I think this is something we may need to think more. So I don't know if I can answer your question. So, but I have worked with some amazing youth project. They don't report automatically to the police or CAS. We really create a space. The youth they need, they can come to get support. But what happened is because so many organizations have the duty to report, to make this youth don't feel safe when they go to assess the service, because they may be identified and they may be report, and then they may be locked up, not in jail, but they are locked up in the like residential, before it's residential home, right? Like group home or whatever. I think this is something we may need to think more. Yeah.
I find the binary of putting people in categories of risk is similar to how, you know, blaming someone for being sexually assaulted because they were wearing a short skirt. So why are people struggling to find housing? Why are people living in poverty? Why are people subjected to white supremacy, to colonization, to all of that? Yeah, so I haven't ever seen a risk assessment tool that I felt like was helpful for the people who are being assessed lives, essentially.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and in terms of youth, like we don't ask people their age either when they come in for support. So, which I think is helpful, and it makes it a little bit safer for youth if they need support from our organization. But we're currently trying to connect with more youth programs in the city as well, just to provide that extra support for youth doing sex work. And I think sometimes, like Elaine said, like it's survival sex work in many cases, but sometimes not. We have to understand that, you know, many youth do have agency to make their own choices. So it's just a complicated situation.
Mm-hmm. Diane.
So someone had a question whether you had any tips for educating or sharing information with people who do sex works regarding their rights, what their rights are.
I mean, I think we do that in many different ways here. Like we do a lot of workshops on, like, you know, related to sex workers issues, related to the laws, and just a lot of different things to provide that education to sex workers. So, yeah.
And we do it too. For example, we have published a booklet called Who is helping the sex worker to know about different authority like CBSA, police, by law enforcement officer, and their power. And then, but the challenge is even people to know their rights, they are not able to exercise the rights, particularly for criminalized community. So, and when the lawyers say you have the right of silence, but actually what happened to the migrant sex worker, if you don't say anything, you'll be arrested. And if you not collaborate, when the law enforcement asks you to dance or sing, give them the money, that if you don't collaborate, you will get into trouble. So that's why we also need the systematic change. One is really important to change the law. Even you know the rights, know the law, but the law is shitty, is harmful, it's still difficult, right? And change the law and also change the practice of the law enforcement. And then we need particularly the violence against women sector to work with the sex work community, because when you care the violence, that you need to care about the systematic violence, also to care the violence from the law enforcement. And otherwise just let the sex worker know about the law is not enough, because most sex worker is may not able to exercise the right, and the law itself is harmful and dangerous. Even you know the law is also difficult.
Yeah. I mean, I know, like I've encountered a lot of sex workers, especially like outdoor workers, who were not even, they had no idea what the new laws were, you know, and we had to, like, you know, have a workshop to explain how the laws work and what they are, and they're very vague too. So, and I think they directly affect outdoor workers more in most cases than indoor workers. So, and also, you know, the populations that are more criminalized are, you know, Indigenous sex workers, racialized sex workers, trans sex workers. So, yeah.
And if somebody is targeted, then what we see is that it'll just be another law that's used against them, like loitering, and then that loitering charge will turn into a this court date, and then that'll turn into this and that. So it just, yeah. So specifically those community members that Jennifer just mentioned, we see targeted with these sort of like roundabout ways of criminalizing a person.
Robert?
I suppose this relates to carrying forward what's just been discussed. There was a question that came in connecting to how to perhaps discuss decriminalization and a number of these laws with, I suppose, peers or just in general discourse. The person writes, when I explain to people why sex workers want this model, not legalization, I struggle to explain why sex work should be considered like other work, but not be government regulated. Can you talk about how that works? Are there other commonly accepted industries that do not have any government regulation?
I think I want to say we are not asking for legalization. We are asking for decriminalization. So this industry should not regulate by the criminal law. But when you see the bylaw, so for example, even massage parlor is allowed, like body rub parlor is allowed, but the over-regulation make them, the government regulation with the intention of control and attack the industry is very different. So for example, many places the body rub parlor only allow in the industrial zone. Actually, you not really care about the safety. You make the sex worker become unsafe when you put them in the industrial zone. And the other is many regulations. So for example, the law enforcement can come in anytime the people don't allow to lock the door. And even some of the law you don't know, so crazy. The woman work in body rub parlor is not allowed to touch the cash. So that means when the client need to make payment, they are not allowed to touch the cash. Like so much over regulation that make the business almost like cannot operate. Like in Toronto, the body rub parlor is $1,300, $13,000. The license fee per year, and so that they are being treated as not the same as other industries. So that's why the regulation, we just say if there is regulation, just like other business, like right, like the food truck or like other kind of industry, people is able to work. It's not with the like intention of abolishing the industry or make them become very dangerous and inaccessible. So and that's why we think if many problems actually come from the law, no matter criminal law or the bylaw, make the people not able to work. So that's why we need the policy that respect the sex work as other industry. Then they can run the business, not being over-regulated.
Yeah. And also too, like the issues with regulating sex work, like I mentioned before, it kind of depends on, you know, the sex workers that are able to, you know, follow those regulations. So some groups of people are going to be falling through the cracks. You know, they might not be able to like afford the license to do sex work, or they might, you know, there's, you know, some sex workers use drugs and there might be mandatory drug testing and HIV testing. And so a lot of sex workers will still have to do sex work, but then they'll be doing it illegally because they don't fit into that criteria, you know, so it's still very harmful. So decriminalization is a lot safer for all sex workers.
And I think it can be possible for a labor framework to be implemented, but that is like the very last step. So the steps that need to happen, the first being the full decriminalization of sex work, are what will bring light to what a labor framework could possibly look like, including all of those in, like, you know, this very broad industry that is sex work, the sex work industry.
I agree.
Diane, back to you.
Do you have one more? Do you have a question
There
for the
was-
last 3 minutes?
Oh, for the last.
Sure, I'll read a comment that we just had come in. So someone said, I work in social service agency in London. I agree that anti-sex work organizations conflate sex work with trafficking. But when we start working in social service agencies, we start vilifying the law enforcement so much we forget that there has to be a balance. I'm hearing some panelists constantly vilifying the law enforcement agencies, but I've come across so many positives where the law enforcement has helped trafficked women house and feel safe.
Well, I mean, I don't know. I just want to comment on the fact that we've tried many times to find a single police officer in Toronto that was sex work friendly. We had before many years ago, but we haven't been able to find one since. You know, if we do have service users who want to report abuse or things like that, it's almost impossible to find someone in law enforcement that is sex work friendly. It's not that we're vilifying, you know, all law enforcement. It's just very hard to find, you know, a police officer who you can trust. And the thing is too, they don't connect with us either. it would be really nice if we could connect with local law enforcement to try to, figure out how we can work together, but it just doesn't happen in our experience here.
We have had a lot of connection, trying to build a better communication and better relationship with law enforcers in London, Ontario. It's resulted in some interesting conversations, but what we see over and over is like, we can have these conversations that take our time and energy that would be better spent on the people who access our space. And we end up with the, policies coming out without any consultation. For example, that we had here, deciding to name and post photos of clients charged with trying to purchase sexual services even before any convictions happen. Sure, maybe, there's definitely some good people who work within law enforcement, perhaps, but those people need to step up and take on this work within that organization and make some change from within. And we need some accountability for the things that have happened, especially in London, Ontario. Actually, not especially, all over this country. Yeah, it's impossible, I think, for most communities that, like most sex worker communities, to not have, just such frustration and disappointment, really.
Yeah.
I am so sorry because it's our time has run out, and I just want to, on behalf of our teams, just to thank you so much for making the time. And I think that we're really aware that an important step is creating safe spaces for us to have discussions and to share perspectives like you did today with all of our participants. And we're really grateful for that. And I know in past times when people doing sex work have wanted and agreed to be part of something that we were hosting, sometimes the feedback is that the targeting, if it's an online event, that they experience after that, the safety, we just can't assure the safety that we would want to. And so we recognize the courage that it takes to share with all of us, and we really appreciate it. And I think that we want to be on record as aspiring allies, and we want to thank all of you and to all of our participants. And there's been some amazing feedback that we will share with you that we weren't able to share throughout. And I just want to end with your comment to us to do the reading, no matter what our position, no matter what our experience, what we've been taught, what those believe around us, to take the time to listen to the voices of people with lived experience in terms of doing sex work, and to hear out their position. And I think that's an invitation we would also want to really thank you for and to reinforce. So again, we'll make sure available is the list of resources that you've all kindly provided. And we urge people to complete the evaluation. And again, thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Julie. Thank you, Elaine.
Thank you.
Thank you. Join our webinar in January of Butterfly.
A quote from someone who accesses our space is, "I rather be seen than obscene." And I think that that's just such a beautiful sentiment, like people just want to be seen. They don't want to be obscene.
Yeah, I love that.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for facilitating us. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye. Take care.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Bye-bye. Thank you.